Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brittany Martin with the American Marketing Association. Thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar is sponsored by Looker. Tap into your marketing data for better ROI. Our presenters today are Elena and Justin, but before we get started, I just want to point out a few things. Your chat box is over to the left-hand side. Go ahead and test it by letting us know what city or what company you're representing today. Also, if you have any specific questions for our presenters, you can type those into the Q&A tab as well. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started. The presentation will be on demand once we conclude. So let's go ahead and start with Elena.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brittany. And to reiterate what she said, thank you for joining us today. My name is Elena Rowell, and I'm joined by my colleague, Justin Powell, today. And so without further ado, let's jump in. Just a disclaimer, I'm going to go big and guess that collecting data is not the issue that you're facing, and that you really have a lot of data. And this is because, the tooling on the market is insane of how many options we have to, create data and create different options for us. And so then the question becomes, how do we turn all of this data that we collect into insights that help us actually do our jobs better? And we broke it down into 3 key areas that we think are really, really important for turning this data into these insights. The first is to make data actionable. From there, we need to make it accessible. And finally, we need to make sure that it's trusted. So these are great words, but what do we actually mean when we say that? Actionable data means that we have metrics that we feel like we can affect. And so choosing the metrics that really reflect our ability to have impact is incredibly important. For accessibility, we believe that you need a complete picture of what's going on in your business to be able to make the best decisions. So creating a world where everybody can have that complete picture. And then finally, for trusted, we want to talk about attribution, because attribution becomes such an emotional thing at some point, because you are talking about, what people contribute, that people really need to trust the models that we're choosing for them to be able to put that forward and really rely on it. And so those are the 3 areas that we're going to dig into today. I'm going to talk a little bit about choosing the right metric. Then Justin is going to talk about creating a complete picture. And finally, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about attribution that can actually move your company forward. So let's talk about choosing the right metric. Before we can choose metrics, it's really important to take a step back and ask yourself what the goal is. It's so easy to get caught up in all of the things that we have going on and all of the different campaigns that we're running and the projects that we're working on, that we forget to ask ourselves, what exactly are we trying to achieve with this? What action do we want people to take? And also just who is our primary audience? We see countless conversations where, the question is, who are we trying to appeal to? And is it people at the top of the funnel, maybe people who haven't yet gotten into our sales cycle but know about us, or maybe even people further down the funnel, or even customers? And the answer that I always get when I ask that question is yes, which is not an answer. It's important to put a stake in the ground and pick what your primary goals are. And that doesn't mean that you can't affect other audiences or you can't, drive for other actions. But choosing that number 1 priority is really important when you go to try and measure it. So in the world that we see that doesn't happen, it turns into a world of dashboards. And everybody loves a great dashboard. Myself, I am a big fan of a great dashboard. And there's certainly the case for dashboards, and they have their place, and they're really, really valuable. They drive engagement with data because they give everybody a way to really, start to see it and understand the business. They allow you to tell a focused story on a single topic that gives everybody a view of just that slice. And they start to drive a data culture by getting everybody involved and maybe, putting them up on a TV in the lobby or whatever it may be. But the effect of the dashboard first approach, you end up with metrics that are very broad. You want to make things appeal to everybody. So you end up with metrics that, are great from a company level, but don't make people empowered to feel like they can actually really change those. Additionally, creating dashboards is generally a task for like a data team that we oftentimes. And so when things change in marketing, which they always do, things are always updating how we want to measure things or even just what our priorities are, going back and making sure that that gets updated is definitely a chore sometimes. And then finally, like when data is really public, we feel very, I guess the encouragement is to focus on what makes us feel good. And so they end up being very vain. So we've come up with this idea, this notion of vanity metrics. Anything that's like super high level that feels like you're giving the success of the organization would fall into this. So even just like total spend, cost per impression, cost per click, they give you the idea of the success of the organization, but don't actually help you make a good decision in a moment. They're great to know like how you're landing in reference to, other people in the market. But if you're overly focused on those vanity metrics, you end up zoomed in on them so much that you're really driving your business towards those individual pieces as opposed to towards the overall success of the company and the business. So the alternative that we see to that is making sure that you choose metrics that create actionable insights. And so these insights are able to give visibility over like a direct experience. So it's an individual thing that you can affect change with. And also, if we think about it, it's like it's a lever that we can pull, that we know how we can change it if we need to, make it go up or make it go down or whatever it is. They also tend to better reflect the reality of what's going on. And they're able to be examined from multiple angles. So they're nice and rich, so we can start to dig into them and really, get the oomph that we need to make the right decision. And hopefully, being actionable insights, they should inspire action. So what do I mean by this? Let's look at a comparison of some vanity metrics versus an actionable metric. So if let's take an e-commerce company, for example. Obviously, we're very concerned about how many orders happen in a day. Total daily orders is a big KPI for the company, but I, as a marketer, can't necessarily change that at an individual level. However, looking at something like cart abandonment rate and digging into that, that's something I can change because that's something that I know that I'm creating, maybe I'm driving people to the website who don't actually convert, even though daily orders are high. For media companies or companies that rely heavily on their website, minutes on a site is a very big metric and also something you definitely deliver to your advertisers. But digging in deeper and thinking about how can we make the bounce rate on each page lower and bring that down and what can we do to affect that? And then finally, for a B2B business, like the average cost per MQL is certainly something that we want to keep an eye on. Our budget is how we're spending our money and it's what we need to know. But on a daily basis, I can't take action on that. But looking at the cost per sales accepted lead, so moving further down the funnel and really qualifying that, and then digging into that by channel, that's something that I know that I can spot if something is going wrong or if something is working really well, and I can adjust what I'm actually doing based on that. So now that we have talked about the metrics and the ideas for getting these richer insights and creating more ROI, I'm going to pass it off to Justin to talk about creating a complete picture of your data.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Elena. So here we'll jump into kind of creating a complete picture. And when we reference that, it's along the lines of, if you remember from that first original slide, right, we saw thousands of SaaS applications, right, that people are using, where you have a lot of these kind of silos of data, right? Where you do have analytics as a component of these different sources, whether it's going to be Facebook ads, Google ads, or if you're using something like Shopify, right, where they're living in these different places, and you're unable to start to or to sort of connect them across these different sources to give you that complete picture, right? And as I was mentioning, right, the issue with these data silos is really three main buckets, right? The first one is, people can't ultimately make a determination of how your marketing spend or marketing performance is translating into actual purchases by your customer, right? The second one is within these applications, right, they have the definitions that they're using to find a lot of these different metrics, which may be inconsistent, right, across the different marketing channels that you might be using, which starts to create some confusion or inconsistencies at least, right, with what you might actually be looking at. And the last one is, as we've been touching on, right, with limited information, there's going to be limited action that you're ultimately going to be able to take with it. So what we'll walk through is, what we mean by that picture, how to get there, and then ultimately, what does that translate to as far as actions. So the first part is going to be just quickly talking through this full picture, right? So these are just some examples of what we mean, right? So you can see that rather than just looking at the marketing spend and where you're getting those clicks, right, or most conversions, you ultimately want to start to be able to connect these to other elements of the funnel and make a determination of things like, are you having customers with the repeat purchases? What is bringing them in on that first purchase? What is bringing them in on those additional purchases? As well as also breaking down, right, where are your most valuable customers coming from? So where is that highest lifetime value? Where are people staying most active with the particular application that you might be using, right? If it's something like gaming, right? That those are the different ways that you want to further slice and dice a lot of the data that you might be looking at. And the way to do that, right, is by being able to connect it across those different sources. So to be able to collect it across those different sources, right, you'll really need to co-locate your data. So that's what we mean by centralizing. So taking it from the different places that they may live amongst those different marketing sources or in these kind of transactional databases that you might have, and really flowing them all into a single location to give you, your marketing team, and really your entire organization that flexibility to be able to access data across these different areas so that ultimately you can start to build a 360-degree view of your customer rather than looking at different points in time across different places. You can start to make more in-depth and rich analyses and ultimately better decisions, right, for customers at different points once you can see their entire journey and how they move through, right? And really across these marketing channels, and for any marketers really, ultimately you want to be able to have that top-down view of how all of your channels are performing, not just on their own, but relative to the other channels themselves, right? So that's how you can make a determination. Should we be investing in Facebook, Instagram, Google Ads, LinkedIn, right? You can see how they all might relate to one another. And then ultimately as well, right, if you want to understand your user demographics and who you might be targeting by co-locating and giving access to them across these different sources, you can also start to understand your target market and demographic as a whole, right? And ultimately, once you have the control of all of that data, you can start to define the consistent definition, right, for what these different date ranges might be, what the different definitions for the key KPIs you might be looking at across your organization, so that you have a single location to have access to all of that data, but also have a single place where you're having consistent definitions across your organization so that the marketing team for, product A and for product B aren't necessarily going to be running their own Excel sheets and may have a meeting where they have those inconsistencies where it drives your strategy in multiple directions. So it helps align everyone in the company and really help drive that data culture as well in the organization. So to give a visual representation, here on the left-hand side, you can see a lot of these common marketing sources that I'm sure a lot of the folks in the call are quite familiar with, right? That's going to be moved into that, centralized data lake. And then once you're in there, that's when you can start to take advantage of that visualization and dashboards, right? And really start to drive the ability for you and your company to be able to dig into that underlying data and really be able to customize the experience that aligns well with the business as well as those business goals, right, that you would initially set up to be able to take advantage of that information and be able to really cater it to what you and your organization might be looking to accomplish, whether it be at that high level on a year-to-year basis, but also being able to dig into that data on that day-to-day basis so that marketers can start to really understand and take action, right, against these insights that they're deriving from your tools. So just some of these examples of ways we've seen people start to leverage the data, right? So the first one's going to be really democratizing data. And what we mean by that is putting data in the hands of the people that need it, right? You don't want to always have to rely on data analysts to serve as that bottleneck for you to give access to data to you, but really you want to start to empower people and provide them the ability to self-serve and slice and dice that data on their own. And when you start to do that, it really starts to drive a data culture since people start to bake analytics and into their day-to-day workflows and really start to make a lot of those data-driven decisions on a daily basis, right? And you can also, create processes so that the marketing analytics that you might be creating inside of your, dashboarding tool, you can also set, parameters around when you want maybe a report to be sent off, right? So say your, cost per 1,000 impressions falls above, $5 for a particular campaign, that maybe you want that to ping your marketing team or the individuals that are owning that particular campaign so that they can be alerted that, hey, you should be taking time to spend on this particular campaign and looking at why the cost has increased for this particular area. So there are a lot of ways that you can start to be more proactive with your data so that individuals don't necessarily need to go into any of these BI or dashboards to derive those insights, but that the insights are actually meeting people in the channels that they normally use. So whether that's going to be email, you can imagine something like Slack. You can even imagine an SMS alert on your phone for your marketers to be able to be alerted of what is happening and what they need to be taking a look at. And in that instance, you can always dive back into the data, start to slice and dice, gather more information to really understand and get to that root cause as far as what's causing this particular uptick. And the last one is going to be really automating workflows, right? So you can even use the data and start to automate entire processes, right? So internally at your company, you may have a definition as far as what you determine as, say, an underperforming Google AdWord, right? And with that definition, you can start to compile a list and automatically send the list of those underperforming AdWords to Google Ads so that it knows to shut those particular AdWords off. So actually taking the people out and starting to improve a lot of the efficiencies and helping you as a marketing organization really get the most out of that marketing spend and use data to start to optimize those processes. Right here, you can just start to see some examples, right, of once you have that data centralized, right, into that data lake, you can always visualize it, right, and gather those insights. But you can also take actions and send it to multiple places, right, whether it's going to be triggering off some email campaigns or sending them to something like Segment to trigger off other actions. But these are all just examples of different ways that you can really start to leverage data, which you can think of as a commodity in your organization, to really get the most out of it. So with that, we'll jump into kind of attribution next, where I'll pass it back to Elena.
Great. Thank you, Justin. So we have chosen the right metrics that we feel like we can take action on a day-to-day basis, and we're able to do that more proactively and productively with a complete picture of all of our data. So the next piece of that is now, like, how do we look forward and how do we choose what we do next? So marketing attribution is all the hotness. It's a phrase that's kind of thrown around, so I'm a big believer in defining your terms as much as possible. So what basically the question is, like, what interactions did we have with our customers and what impact did each interaction have? Let's figure out that, and then let's assign a monetary value associated with, whatever the customer did, whether it was a purchase or maybe a contract value or whatever that is, across those different interactions. And a simple way of thinking about it is basically credit where credit is due. But this also becomes very, very, it's a slippery slope, and it becomes very touchy very quickly, because who decides that? And there's a part of marketing attribution that's really like statistical and number driven and very like cold but accurate feeling. And then there's the other side, though, that you're putting a monetary value on what your employees are contributing. And so if they don't trust it, if they don't feel like it's representative, then they're also not going to actually use it. So attribution is, a lot of people feel like they should have marketing attribution for the sake of having marketing attribution. And the real value that it gives you is starting to look at what's happening in your funnel from a holistic standpoint, and from an actual impact on deals and impact on people, and starting to see that, in a broader sense. So there are 3 main attribution models that people leverage. First touch, it's fairly obvious, but this method of attribution assigns 100% of credit to the first campaign that reaches our target. So effectively, the effect of that is that none of the subsequent campaigns get any credit. The last touch is the opposite. So this method of attribution assigns 100% of the credit to the campaign that directly preceded the conversion. So if they came in through maybe an AdWord and they attended a webinar, great for them, attending a webinar, and then maybe came back to your site and read a white paper, and then ultimately came to a trade show, maybe that was what ultimately got them into the demo or what got them into the deal, that would get all of the credit. So then finally, we also have multi-touch attribution, where we distribute the credit among the various touch points. So I'm going to each of these methods have pros and cons, and I'm going to dive into that now. So as far as first touch attribution goes, it's super easy to implement and it's super easy to understand, which I think can't be undervalued. So it's a good choice if you have limited analytical capabilities, or if you're focused on net new traffic. It only provides a piece of the picture, and very much favors activities that focus on net new traffic. So if you're a new business and you're trying to build out a database, first touch attribution is actually probably what you want to start with, because you end up being very biased by the attribution model that you choose. But if your bias is towards getting new people into the very tippy top of your funnel, then that's okay. So last touch, similar to first touch, is also fairly easy to implement and fairly easy to understand, which is really not to be undervalued, because people understanding why the attribution model is doing what it is important, as well as actually being able to get it up and running. So this ends up favoring activities that are focused on people who already know about us. And it's great for re-engaging existing databases. It doesn't, however, help you feed that top of the funnel, but it does help you, convert the people that you already have. And maybe this is better for, later stage deals, or even, engaging with your customers or whatever that may be. So finally, the holy grail of marketing analytics is multi-touch attribution. It's very challenging to implement. It can be very challenging to implement. There's ultimately no right answer, but there's really 2 ways that people will spread the credit throughout the campaign. So the first one is a linear attribution model, which basically takes all of your, it takes all the campaigns that people touched and distributes it in a linear way. So if they touched 4 campaigns, each one would get 25% of the credit. And it's very flat, but very, I guess, equal. The next type is weighted distribution, which assigns values to different stages of the campaign touches. So there's actually 2 ways of doing weighted. One is with time decay, which basically assumes that the target gets close, as they get closer to the conversion, the campaigns are having more and more impact. This approach ultimately discounts the impact of earlier campaigns and gives more credit to later campaigns. There's also position-based attribution, which basically decides that the rank of the campaign and like the order in which they come in. So a common implementation of this would be to assign 40% of the credit to the first campaign, 40% of the credit to the last campaign, and then split the remaining 20% among everything that comes between. So these can all be customized and chosen to reflect your business. But this is kind of the high level. But my general feeling and what we at Looker believe in is not just choosing one. Like choosing an attribution model doesn't have to be a binary decision. So if you are able to create some sort of attribution dashboard that allows you to switch back and forth between them, you can make sure that you're thinking about things from all angles. And if you want to focus on that top of the funnel, you can make your attribution reflect that. And if you want to focus at the bottom of the funnel, you can make it reflect that. And what this gives you is it gives you a better idea of what's going on holistically, as opposed to just yes and no. So like for that dashboard, the left-hand one is it filtered for last touch attribution, and we can see that AdWords is not a huge performer for that. And the right-hand one is for focus for first touch attribution, and AdWords is just crushing it over there because AdWords tends to be a very, very high level, high in the funnel touch point for people. And being able to switch back and forth between those gives you the context of both of them so that you can feel like it makes sense to everybody. So some tips for attribution and choosing a model and implementing a model. The first is to keep it simple. It's really tempting to try and make it 100% right and thinking about, is it 80% that gets distributed between first and last? Maybe it should only be 70%, maybe it should be 75%. At some point, if you're able to get value out of it, simple is okay. Very much a proponent of using more than one approach to be able to give you that multifaceted view of your business. And then being clear about what the model is and isn't. Attribution will never be 100% right. And being clear that this is a tool for us to understand the impact of our campaigns and to choose campaigns and choose tactics that move the needle where we want and invest in programs that we feel really add to the bottom line. But this is not the sum of the worth of a person or of their program in general. And then finally is just to iterate as needed. It's a learning process of how you do this, and like continuing to have your attribution model grow with your company will help it continue to be a trusted resource for everybody. So let's go over how we're going to tap into your marketing data for better ROI. First and foremost, remember to choose actionable, impactable metrics and avoid vanity metrics so you can make sure that you have the insights that you need to actually pull a lever and make a decision. Next, it's important to create a complete picture of your business. So not only your marketing org, but also your entire business, and really try to understand what's going on across that instead of just a single silo. And finally, make sure to choose an attribution model or models that makes sense for you and for your business and for where you're at. So that is the end of the content portion of this. We have questions coming in, and we're really excited to answer those. So I'm going to pass it back to do some Q&A.
Okay, perfect. So we do have quite a few questions that are coming in from the audience. Our first question comes in from Rachel. Does Looker integrate with my other marketing tools?
That is a great question. So Justin touched on this a little bit, of the ability to, send a text alert if, AdWords is underperforming. We have this notion of something called like an action hub, but basically the idea is that you are able to build a richer view of things once you get it centralized. And then passing that richer view, feeding that out to other systems is really powerful. So short answer is yes. The long answer is like we have customers who will build lists of prospects that have engaged with a certain piece of content but haven't ultimately closed, or maybe prospects that are in a freemium version that we're trying to upgrade to a premium version, and take those custom lists, push them into a system like Marketo, and then use that to create a custom email chain or email flow that impacts them. But we have that much richer data source to feed that. So yes. Justin, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yep. Yeah. I think, with Looker, you can really start to customize whatever the actual parameters are for when you'd want to trigger it. So you can also use it just to trigger email campaigns, right? So in the example that Elena had gone over previously for cart abandonment, right? That could be an example of every time a user may have abandoned their cart, that you also have information with what was in that cart, that you can also use that as a trigger to send an email campaign as a reminder to that particular user, being like, hey, you had this cart with items, XYZ, if you'd still like to come back and make those purchases. So ways to really start to drive other email campaigns as well.
Okay, perfect. Now our next question is coming in from Andrea. Can you speak about how Looker Tools supports embedded analytics?
Happily.
Yep, sure.
Justin, do you want to go for that one?
Sure. Yeah, I can take a stab at that one. So really with Looker, any of these dashboards and reports can be embedded directly into your web portal or application, right? So about, half of our customers are using Looker specifically for that client-facing analytics. So not totally sure around the exact use case you might be referencing, Andrea, but, we've seen the range of, say, digital marketing agencies exposing out, say, the campaign performance of their marketing campaigns that they might be running on behalf of their customers, and allowing their customers to also further slice and dice that data as like a value add service in their offering. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add, Elena, to that.
No, I think that's exactly right.
Cool.
Okay, perfect. So our next question is, do you know how to include awareness media spend and attribution?
Yes. The ongoing problem of awareness and attributing value to like brand, it's a constant problem. We had a customer who did something really interesting that I found very cool. So what they did is they were running radio ads. I think they were running them on NPR, and they wanted to know if they were having impact. So obviously they had the link, that was special that people could go to, but that's not really where most of it comes in. So what they did is they were able to connect the flat lawn of the radio towers in the areas. No, they were able to identify the areas they were running the ads in, and then match that to the areas where web traffic was coming from. And so then if they just looked at those areas in isolation and then looked at the organic traffic before and after and were able to benchmark that, then they were able to see the increase due to the ads and see them every day that they ran and the days that they didn't run, the variations between those. And I think what they actually figured out is that it was better to run it it was a 3-week spend or whatever on it, and it was better to run it on the first week and then twice on the second week and once on the third week to get like the most impact of that spend. So there are very creative ways that you can figure out how to do it. At the end of the day, if you don't have any data on it, you can't measure it, which is a bummer. But being able to basically tie together location data and IP data with whatever you have, whatever information you have on the media that you're spending on, does give you something.
Okay, awesome. So we have Steve here as well, and he's going back to vanity metrics. Can you think of some other ways that companies often may misuse their data?
May misuse their data. Okay, so yes. I mean, data is so valuable, is inherently, like, in data is actually not super valuable because just having numbers and charts or just numbers alone don't give you anything. So I think untapped potential of data is a huge problem that we see. And then from there, the idea of what we've seen across the market is that basically, like, tools used to create experiences that let you look backwards and let you do reporting on the past. That was like the first generation of reporting tools. The next generation, which we see a lot of people still using today, allow you to understand what's going on now, but being able to take the data and dig into it to the level that you can understand what's going to happen and what could happen is that, like, next generation of analytics. So starting to feed it into other workflows, maybe feed it into AI or ML workflows, starting to have it trigger, actions on behalf of other people, starts to get the more richness out of that data. As far as the metrics go, we definitely have companies that come to us that want that, we just need a dashboard for our CEO to have that he can look at every morning, every Monday. And sometimes that is actually all they want. And that's, if that works for them, then that's fine, but they're definitely not leveraging the data to the utmost potential. But what we're able to do is really talk to people about, like, well, what's the business problem that you're trying to solve? Let's think about that, and then let's think about how we can come up with metrics that help us achieve that. Justin?
Yep, I think that's right. I mean, a lot of the ways that, data can be misused too is if you don't have the proper context, right? Data can tell really 1,000 stories, but you just have to make sure that the story that you're looking at is really in context, right? You can always look at, say, a point in time where maybe CPM had spiked, and if you don't dig into the underlying reason why, right, that you may take it at face value and maybe think that you automatically shut that off, right? But maybe you're gaining a lot of super valuable customers or generating a lot of revenue, right? That really having the flexibility to be able to dig into the data further to understand fundamentally that why question is critical, I think, to properly using the data that you have available. The other piece too is the danger of data in the wild as well is anyone can really, access or, start to analyze it, say, in separate Excel sheets. As I had mentioned, right, that can cause inconsistencies with how people are looking at the underlying raw data, creating their own definitions that may not be consistent, resulting in, completely disparate marketing strategies across an organization versus that unified approach.
And I just add on, I think that's exactly right, Justin. And, like, the other piece of that is that at some point, if you torture data enough, it'll tell you what you want it to know. So if people are really just trying to prove, like, personal value or, like, success as opposed to, like, analytics and insights, that's also a big risk.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So our next question is going to come in from Gary in Chicago. So he has a startup company and he wants to know specifically how can he sort of get started? Do you recommend just starting like a database, or do you recommend just tapping into some of the tools that you suggested? What can you offer to like a small business or to specifically like an entrepreneur like Gary?
Justin?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I actually work with a lot of startups and companies actually in the SMB space. So our suggestion really is, and obviously it'll be dependent on your scale of marketing and the scale at your organization. But one of the ways is obviously to really try to centralize that data. I mean, from there, you start to get just a lot more value so that as you're preparing for, say, a ramp in your marketing spend or kicking off another channel, right, that you're going to be marketing through, that you can really have that context. And then making sure, especially as a startup, since things are changing so constantly, that you're always making sure that you're making the most of every additional dollar that you're spending. So the recommendation, yeah, would be to centralize and, start to access that centralized data. If you have more questions, I mean, we do have these resources here splashed up on the screen that we're always more than happy to provide more information, custom to your specific company on.
Okay, perfect. So I think that actually brings us pretty close to our time. Elena and Justin, do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to leave with our audience today?
That's a great question. I think I would leave people with the idea, I guess, that there is so much power in your data, and the ability as a marketer to come into a room and say, like, this is what we should do, and like, here's this data behind it, is so powerful. And like that, the moment when someone is like, I don't think that's a good idea, and you're like, well, let me present you with this logical reason as to why this is the right move, is so powerful and such a like thrill and empowering thing, that if you can figure out how to make yourself successful with data, it will make you super successful, I think, in your career and also your business ultimately more successful.
Yep. And what I would add is I think, with data, I think it can lead you down very interesting kind of pathways that you may not necessarily have originally thought. And what I mean is it'll help you identify just interesting anomalies that you as a team or as an organization, can really go after and dig into and start to supplement and collect more information about, that can start to derive really interesting kind of pivots in your organization that you may not have, originally thought of without having data to help serve as that starting point, to really serve as that initial anomaly detection, while also giving you that flexibility to keep diving deeper into it, to drive your overall kind of strategy and direction as an organization.
Okay, perfect. So, audience, let's go ahead and give our two presenters a virtual round of applause by saying thank you in the chat box. Just a reminder that this presentation will be available on demand once we conclude. But otherwise, I hope that you guys have a really great day. Thank you, Elena and Justin, again for giving this presentation. That was sponsored by Looker. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and end, and we hope to see you guys next week for Looker's presentation on July 31st at 12 o'clock Central Time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.